Before we get into the program tonight, welcome. Thank you so much for coming out and joining us here at Soul Food. How many of you are here for the first time for Astrology Night? Okay, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. What we're going to do is Rick and I are going to talk for 40 minutes or so about the general astrological patterns for the month of November, for the month of October. These are general astrological patterns. They're the cosmic weather. They're not directed at any one individual, but they represent the collective general weather that we'll all be experiencing here in the month of October. Then, after we go through the bulk of the program, we'll take about a 10-minute break, and we encourage you, as you are doing, to patronize Soul Food, who makes this possible for us. During the break, we're going to pick 3 charts to look at. If you'd like your chart looked at, write down on a piece of paper your first name, your date of birth, your place of birth, and your time of birth. Put it on the table over here, and
along with a $20 bill.
And we'll do. Still gets a laugh. Oh, from the new guy. He hasn't heard it every month
That's
for
why
the
I
last
do it.
4 years. All right, no new people from now on. But Rick and I will do a little mini reading for 3 people after the break, and that's really to give you a chance to see what an individualized astrology chart looks like with respect to current and upcoming cycles. So you all set?
Yes.
All right. Well, welcome to Soul Food. Welcome, Rick. Thank you, Julie, our videographer.
Jeff, before we get into the material, even though we're taping or recording, should we say something about Brighton Bush?
Oh, yes, we should.
We should.
Rick and I do an annual retreat in January at Brighton Bush Hot Springs, which is about an hour east of Salem, Oregon. It's an incredible place. You should go to it, whether you come to our seminar or not. It's an amazing experience. But from January 10th through 12th, Rick and I will be doing a Friday night, Saturday, and half-day Sunday, talking about the major trends of 2014. And as part of the seminar, in the group, we look at the chart of all of the attendees. It's a small group, maximum of 20 people or so, and everyone there gets their chart looked at by Rick and me, and we talk about it in front of the group.
And as Jeff said, Brighton Bush is a totally magical place up in the old-growth forest in the Cascades. There, all the cabins are heated by geothermal water, and there are hot tubs and 3 meals a day. And this will be our, 6th year, I think, of doing it or something like that. And it's a very, very fun group. It's and if you're interested at all, go online to Brighton Bush. That's BreitenBush.com and find out more there.
All right, now let's talk about October. We're getting an early start. We do this the first Wednesday of every month, and it's nice to get to do it as early as the 2nd so that we can get you the info on time.
Right, and this is an interesting month. Jeff and I were talking before we started just now, and a lot of this month builds toward a major aspect that we've been talking about for a couple of years at least, and we'll be talking about for a couple of years at least. And the discussion that Jeff and I had before we started tonight was whether the culmination of this aspect on November 1st, the 4th of 7 times it occurs over a 3-year period, whether the exact occurrence of this on November 1st is where this month leads to, or is it where this month actually kicks off because of reasons we'll explain in a moment.
And what Rick is talking about is the square, the tense 90-degree angle between Uranus, the planet of rebellion and revolution and spontaneous Aries, and potent, powerful, transformational Pluto in Capricorn. There are 7 squares, 7 right angles between these two outer planets between 2012 and 2015, and we're coming up on the fourth one, I believe. Now, what's interesting is that we've talked about this. Many people in the astrological community have been talking about it, and yet I think we here, particularly in the United States, have a very clear symbolic expression of this particular aspect. Although the next exact one is on November 1st, this week the sun is triggering this particular pattern. And a fundamental idea of astrology is that slow-moving planetary patterns, which are the most important ones, are triggered by faster-moving planets. And it's when they're triggered by the faster-moving ones that we tend to have events. The sun in Libra, the sign of diplomacy, the sign of accommodation, the sign of let's meet halfway.
The sign of, if it's okay for you, Jeff, it's okay for me.
And we're all brothers and sisters here in Congress. And yet, that sun in Libra, yesterday, I believe, formed a square, a tense right angle with Pluto, power, in Capricorn, government. And in when is it, 2 days or so, the sun will oppose Uranus.
Tomorrow, on the 3rd.
The planet of rebellion. And one of the core meanings of the Uranus-Pluto square is the breakdown of institutions. Uranus is rebellion and liberation. Pluto in Capricorn is about institutions. So we're experiencing here in the United States this institutional breakdown. So much so that the government isn't working.
Yeah, I'm sure some of you heard today, someone recorded the telephone at the Johnson Space Center. When you call it, the phone machine answers, and it says, "We cannot take your call. We are closed." That's all.
So,
but the thing is here, just to pick up on what Jeff was saying, in astrology, Capricorn is the sign of all institutions that have structure. Anything that has basic structure in the world is Capricornian, including whether it's a bridge or a road or a bank or a government. And certainly banks and governments are the, kind of the core of the structure in which we live. And Pluto, the planet Pluto, is about gradual upheaval so that those things which have the most structure begin to deconstruct and then need to reconstruct. That in itself is a slow-moving 20-year process as Pluto moves through Capricorn. But as Uranus, the planet of lightning-striking, sudden shock, impulsive, immediate, unexpected, in-the-moment energy, Uranus in Aries, which is also spontaneous and in the moment, as these two planets move in and out of their squares, that's when this action is the most heightened. And of course, as Jeff said, with the sun moving into opposition, first square yesterday to Pluto and opposition to Uranus tomorrow, it's like no one knows how we got here or how we're going to get out of here, except everyone knows how we got here. I mean, it's been a very slow-moving, methodical, dance that's moved us to this moment. And yet now it seems as if there's an impasse, and the impasse is stroke. Uranus, lightning, it's like a nervous, it's like the government is having a stroke, and for a moment there's nothing happening. It's going to need to be revived.
And of course, those who perceive themselves as liberators feel that they're dealing with oppression. And it's very interesting. You could have been in the middle of a war protest, I remember back in the 60s, which were triggered by the first Uranus-Pluto conjunction, the late 60s and early 70s, and being out there protesting against the Vietnam War. And yet I understand that there were people in the buildings who thought I was causing trouble and that I was the problem. So rather than trying to wrangle about this politically, I think what you and I can do and how we can benefit from astrology is to recognize within ourselves where we are institutionalized and repressive That's where we're Pluto in Capricorn. What areas of life do we have where we demand absolute control and order? And where in our lives are we the rebels? Where are we the Uranus and Aries individuals who are trying to break patterns or free ourselves from elements of control? And I think what a new moon in Libra, and what Libra really has to teach us all the time, is the person on the other side is you. That whatever you're wrestling with, whatever you're fighting with, you've drawn into your life story. It's a projection within your own movie. And we all have an opportunity here, rather than shaking our fists from the right, from the left, from the middle at those incompetence, those failures. And believe me, I go there. But that's not where astrology can be helpful to us. Astrology doesn't work well as a tool for partisanship. Astrology works really well as a tool for consciousness and personal responsibility. So what we can learn is how we move between places of control and demands for freedom. And in seeing those mechanisms in ourselves, perhaps rather than being caught in a collective social stalemate, we will innovate, we will discover, and we will come up with solutions for ourselves that we hope will trickle up to those in government.
Well said. So, taking this again just with a slightly different lean, we have Uranus squaring Pluto. It's within a degree and a half right now, and over the next month, it will become exact. And into that, not only do we have the Sun, which on the 1st, yesterday, squared Pluto, and then tomorrow, the 3rd, will oppose Uranus, but the day after that, on Friday, the Moon moves into Libra, lines up with the Sun. Remember, once a month, we have a new moon. That is the alignment of the Moon and the Sun. That's the beginning of the emotional cycle. And so on Friday, the new moon in... Thank you for another one of those. The new moon in Libra actually kicks off this square again, even more personally, because now the moon is involved.
Right. And because the moon is emotional, the moon is extremely personal. A new moon in Libra is always about a fresh start in relationships. And this fresh start in relationships is a fresh start in the middle of a tornado, a hurricane, and an earthquake, all happening at the same time.
And it might look like that's happening, like you said, it might look like we are trying to remain placid in the midst of this tornado or hurricane. And I think, and Jeff said this, but I'm going to come back at this from a personal point of view. It's important to understand that all tornadoes and all hurricanes and all earthquakes are of our own making, including this relationship earthquake or hurricane, which is really about how do we find balance and freedom and transformation, somehow holding this position, knowing that we can't hold on to anything.
Right, and the key to understanding any relationship is to look at the relationships within ourselves as individuals. I mean, who doesn't have contradictory drives? Who doesn't have some areas of confusion, some areas of rigidity? And when we own it, not as victims, not as perpetrators, but simply as active agents of consciousness, we put ourselves in the middle of the Libra scales, and we have, or we can find the balance to move in whatever direction we need to at any given moment of time. But in ordinary reality, that means what we get at sort of base level of awareness or sleepiness, relationships are likely to be shaken.
Yeah, and this pattern really is one of the most potent pieces of that's going to happen this month, even though, as we said earlier, the aspect between Uranus and Pluto grows closer and closer and closer together. And we just might want to put in the back of our minds that every time planets over the next few years and over the last couple of years move through any of the season starting signs, Aries, spring, Cancer, summer, Libra, autumn, Capricorn, winter, that's when this square is activated. And with the sun and moon moving through this square, it's the tail end of this activation for this season. But we might just project ahead in our minds and think about when all these planets, Mercury and Venus and the sun and the moon, of course, is whizzing around once a month, and eventually Mars, they're all going to come through again around the holiday season this year when things are activated again. I know that's down the road a little bit, but just put that out there in your mind somewhere.
Yeah, but if you survived Christmas last year, you'll probably do okay this year because these aspects were triggered at that time as well.
Yes.
So if you've been able to maintain some semblance of civility in your family, great. Now, the other piece of this is Libra is about alliances. Sometimes they're temporary alliances, but I think we're likely to see some political shifting around this in terms of people's identification. I mean the politicians' identification with the Tea Party sort of pulling from the right. There are more moderate Republicans who are in kind of an uncomfortable position. It's going to be quite interesting because symbolically this has the potential for having a longer-term effect in terms of shifting the American political structure. One other thing. I'm sorry, Rick. One other thing I wanted to mention is the lines, for those of you who are unfamiliar with astrology in this level, are aspects or significant angles between planets. They're the internal wiring or the links among these different planetary positions. And we use orbs or allowances. That is to say, astrologers say for something to be called an opposition like this, it has to be within X amount of degrees, usually 8. But the reason I'm pointing this out is that Jupiter, the largest true planet, is pretty darn close to a square. Actually, it's got a thin red line here indicating that it's wide of the exact square, but close enough to be in the game.
And it will get thicker day by day because the sun moves about a degree each day. And so over the following week, the sun will move into square to Jupiter. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But good point. Jupiter is still part of this whole complex of energies. Jupiter, the planet of overdoing, overstating your case. Jupiter, the planet of my philosophy, is more important than reality.
Well, and the fact that Jupiter is in the sign of Cancer, which is arguably the most subjective, the most personal sign in the zodiac. And that means that philosophical Jupiter in Cancer takes our beliefs and philosophies and just intensifies the feelings about them, which acts in contrast with the open-mindedness that Libra represents, or the pragmatism that Capricorn represents, or the potential for new forms that Aries represents. So that's another factor that's sort of heating up the environment.
Okay, now I'd like to bring another piece into this equation that's very important. It's important for what's going on now, and it lasts for a while, but it's a little bit different than what we've been talking about. We've been talking about the square between revolutionary Uranus to transformational Pluto and its tension to the planets in Libra. And I want to bring in now this big, fat, thick green line, which has to do, first of all, the green line, again, Jeff said that these colored lines are angles. The green line is an angle called a quincunx. It's 5/12 of a circle. It's an irritating aspect. It's an angle of discomfort. It's an angle that says the energy here can't be resolved, but it can't go away either. I think of it as the mosquito in the tent, that every time you get up to get the damn mosquito, it disappears, and then you go back to sleep, and just as you're dozing off, you hear it buzzing again. It's that kind of niggling energy.
Yeah, another way to look at it is the red lines represent crises.
Yes.
This green line is something that's chronic. So it's really about something you have to deal with its limitations, with the mosquito in the tent.
Good, and the word chronic or chronos comes in here again because the planet Saturn is a Latin word for chronos, which is a Greek word for the same thing. Chronos, father time. And what we have here is Saturn in Scorpio, which we'll say more about in a moment, but Saturn at 10 degrees of Scorpio is making a quincunx, this irritating, annoying, irresolvable aspect to wild and crazy Uranus. Saturn is about boundaries. Saturn is about limitations. Uranus is about who the hell cares. Uranus is the lightning striking that breaks down the wall or the building or the tree or the voice that at exactly the right frequency shatters the illusion of the solid glass. Boom, it's no longer there. And so we have this dance between the structure, the limitations, the rules, the law, and Uranus that basically is about breaking through that. And Jeff and I were talking earlier as in reference to Uranus being an irrepressible force. Uranus, you can't stop it. It's like once you light the fuse, the dynamite's going to explode. Once the nuclear reaction starts, you can't stop it halfway through. Once the lightning starts to strike, you can't stop it. It's irrepressible and unstoppable once it starts. On the other hand, Saturn is about an immovable object. Saturn stops anything. So here's what we have. We have an irrepressible force meeting an immovable object.
And the irrepressible force doesn't give a damn about the immovable object. If it annoys it, irritates it, blows it up, shuts down healthy functioning, so be it. But that's often the revolutionary's position, whether a revolutionary from the right or the left says, no, there is no room for compromise. We've reached a place where the repressive forces of Saturn in Scorpio and Pluto in Capricorn, who are deep, dark allies at this time, these two densest, most concentrated planets are in one another's home signs and in a harmonious relationship with one another. So
that's the blue line right here.
Right, that's a sextile or 60-degree angle that connects sort of heavy and repressive forces. So this brings up something Rick and I always come around to. Is a harmonious aspect between hard planets a good thing, or does that just mean that the gangsters are better armed and more efficient and effective these days?
We sometimes call this argument, what happens when good things happen to bad planets or bad things happen to good planets? And it's interesting because over the years, we've taken opposite sides with equal force, not realizing that we've switched our positions. So we don't know.
I realize.
Yeah. Jeff knows. What is important here, though, is that Uranus is very much in play with its, not only with its opposition from the new moon, but also from this quincunx, and Pluto is in play, not only from the square from Uranus and the square from the new moon, but also from the supportive sextile as first Saturn, and then on October 8th, as we advance this a day at a time, we can see Mercury reaches that 10-degree point. Mercury catches up with Saturn and forms that sextile more exactly, and you can see how fat that line gets as those aspects are exact, which gives us support, which also basically tells us or suggests that the way through this is Mercury. Mercury was the original shuttle diplomat. You know, when Persephone was abducted into the underworld by Hades, by Pluto, Mercury was sent to work out the deal. Mercury was the only one of the Olympian gods who could go back and forth without taking a position, remaining neutral. And I find it very interesting that over the next several days through October 8th, both Mercury catches up with Saturn, and they both form this harmonious relationship with Pluto, which suggests that communication actually can somehow forge an agreement. It was never an easy agreement the agreement that Mercury made with the underworld, with the king of the underworld, Pluto. It was never an easy agreement, but at least it was an agreement. And I get the feeling that we may see something like that as Mercury moves through those degrees.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think not only collectively, but in our personal lives, we have to think about the cost of the agreements that we make. See, because with Libra, we want to agree. We really would like to get along. But Mercury, the communication planet, is in deep dark Scorpio, where there are hidden costs. It's joining Saturn, which means that those costs are likely to endure for a long, long time. So it's kind of like buying peace in our time. In other words, and we run into this in life a lot. To accommodate things in a short-term situation, sometimes we make agreements that have negative long-term implications. And certainly that's the shadow side of the diplomat being successful in creating an agreement here. While it might look good today, I'm not quite sure how we're going to feel about it, down the road.
Yeah. The other thing that happens during this particular time is we get the first of the inner planets escaping from the serious, heavy, transformational, emotionally intense sign of Scorpio as Venus moves from Scorpio into Sagittarius.
That's on the 7th.
That's on the 7th, followed by the moon on the 8th. And this can be a little hope in a deep picture. I won't say a dark picture.
Yeah, because the sequence from Scorpio to Sagittarius is going from the depths, which is what Scorpio is about. It's not inherently bad. No sign is good or bad. They all have their purposes and their places. But it's going from the depth to then look up to the heights, which is what Sagittarius is about. So what's interesting is when Venus, the planet of love and pleasure and self-worth and relationship, is in Sagittarius, we'd rather not deal with the problems. We just want to go on vacation. We want to discuss something else. Sagittarius is a sign of the long-distance traveler, and the love planet, the pleasure planet, moving into Sagittarius says, let's go somewhere else, or I want to be somewhere else. And although in a positive sense that can lift spirits, it can also be a means to escape the deeper realities that still haven't been addressed.
Yeah, there's that whole magician thing of, if my hand's out here, you don't see what's going on over here. And in a way, the planets moving into Sagittarius are hopeful. They're exciting. They have a sense of adventure, and we're willing to go there. And then maybe all of a sudden those things which are not quite resolved lose focus, and we can kind of escape. And I think that there is a bit of an escape going on as Venus and then the moon move into Sagittarius. But on the other hand, we have a little bit of an anchor that says, oh, you think you're going to escape. Uh-huh.
Yeah, when communicative Mercury joins Saturn on the 8th, one day after Venus goes into Sagittarius, it reminds me of one of those movies where somebody, maybe a couple, is escaping. They're about to get on the plane. The plane is Sagittarius. It takes you far away, and they get busted just at the very last minute with that Mercury-Saturn conjunction when accountability rears its not always pretty head.
Right, and the thing is that I think the operative words to what you just said, Jeff, are not always. Because chances are, as we get to this 7th and 8th, where the planets are moving into Sagittarius, we've been so down, deep, long. There's a part of us that's a bit tired of it. And when Venus moves into Sagittarius, we go blue sky, wow, airplane, let's go. And it's almost like we're willing to escape without finishing what we need to finish. That's when Saturn says, not on your life. You didn't do your homework. You didn't turn in your assignment. You didn't take out the trash. You didn't pay the whatever it is. Saturn's there. The flip side of that, though, is that if we are taking care of our stuff all along, Saturn acts as a gatekeeper who says, you've paid your ticket. You get to go on this ride. have a great time. Jeff sometimes says that Saturn's the planet that says no but means yes. It's because Saturn will hold you back and make you work hard until you get it right. But we have problems as humans, and that is most of us don't get it right.
We don't even know what right is.
You know,
that makes it harder.
The word Saturn, the etymology of Saturn is the same as Satan. It's the same word. You know, Satan is what happens when you don't get it right. You get punished. And there's a rather substantially large religion that says we were all born of original sin, therefore we can't get it right, therefore we all get punished and go to visit Satan. The thing, though, is in astrology, Saturn isn't negative. It just feels negative when you haven't done the work. So part of the thing to keep in mind for these next days as Mercury is moving towards Saturn is to be aware that there will be a ticket taker or there will be an exam. And if you haven't done your homework, there's no way you're getting through. If you have, then you're ready to fly.
The good news, I suppose,
I thought that was good news.
Well, is that there'll be a retest because Mercury is going retrograde this month on the 21st. Mercury will join Saturn in reverse again later this month. That's on the 29th. And will come back and join Saturn again after turning direct.
And we'll see
November.
that graphically in a moment.
Yeah. So what that means, and it makes sense because Saturn's thick, Scorpio is thick, it's slow. We're not going to get it all at once. And in fact, I think that on the 8th, if you just define the problem or the issue with sufficient clarity, that will be a significant enough accomplishment to lead to resolving that problem later on down the road.
And that's good because I don't think that the heaviness of the Saturn, of the Mercury-Saturn conjunction lasts long, because watch the sun over the next few days as I advance this forward a day at a time. Watch that line thicken up. And what happens is that by the 12th, two things happen, two separate aspects happen. One is that the sun squares Saturn, and the other is that Venus squares Neptune. Venus squares Neptune on the 10th. The sun squares Jupiter. Sun squares Jupiter on the 12th. And both of these really lighten things up. They change. They change temporarily, I think, but they change the nature of how oppressive it all feels, how hopeless, how heavy. It's like we're given a second ticket to ride.
Yeah, and Venus square Neptune is at its best bliss. Venus is the planet of love. She's in Sagittarius, where anything goes. She forms a right angle with spiritual, magical, imaginative Neptune, and bliss is a potential gift.
I agree with you. Venus square Neptune is bliss. That's the upside. The downside is that it may have nothing to do with reality. I'm not saying it won't, but Neptune is the planet of dreams and imagination. So when Venus, the planet of love, squares the planet of fantasy, have a nice trip.
Well, you know, I thought of this when we were talking about Venus going into Sagittarius and getting away from it all. Venus is square to Neptune is also about getting away from it all. The sun square to Jupiter can also be about getting away from it all. And it made
getting away from it all and going even farther.
That's right. But it made me think about vacation. Now, people can go on vacation and have enough sort of rest and relaxation that they go back to their work life energized and productive. There are other people who go away on vacation and are so blissed out by the experience that when they go back, they realize their work life sucks and they've got to get fired or quit their job. So it's a very interesting thing when we get those tastes of bliss, of beauty, of peace through meditation, through love, through good coffee and food, whatever it is. It's quite interesting in this case to be able to extract something from those blissful moments that you can integrate in your life in a more continuous way. If you can do that, then we're getting the sweetness and applying it in a way that it will make life sweeter rather than causing a contrast that makes our lives taste more sour.
I think the concept of vacation, adventure is all, I think those are good words to use. But let's just remember that both Neptune, Venus is squaring Neptune, and Jupiter, the sun will be squaring Jupiter, both Jupiter and Neptune are both expansive. So there's this, again, this opening, this growth phase, this sense of moving beyond the current restrictions. And yet, if we move too hard, too far, too fast, Jupiter is the planet of too much, too far, it's indulgence or overindulgence. Jupiter is expansive to the point that if you blow up a balloon too much, the balloon will pop. And so we need to just pay attention. And I know sometimes Jeff and I have, I'm the one who always says, this is a great aspect, be careful you don't take it too far. And Jeff's always the one that goes, this is a great aspect, take it as far as you can go. Which is kind of an interesting...
Our philosophies are exactly opposite to how we live our lives.
Exactly,
so
that's what I was saying.
But in that way, we become all-encompassing. Hypocrisy is a way to become complete. Trust me, especially in Libra.
I like to think of it as paradoxical rather than hypocritical. Regardless, the fact is that the Sun and Jupiter together make up 99.999, some ridiculous number percent, of all the solid mass of the entire solar system. The Sun and Jupiter are the two big guys. And when they're 90 degrees to each other, we can become so enthused, so excited, so optimistic, so confident, so full of our own gaseous ideas that our philosophy basically can overtake anything, which is good news for about an hour or a day or a couple of days. And that's the point of this particular few days. Each of you, next month when we get back together in November, let's share so what'd you overextend in mid-October? Where did you go too far? What idea that was a brilliant idea should you have stopped with when you were only ruling the country or the world rather than the universe?
One of the things that is interesting as well, I think, about this aspect is that it's a first quarter square, meaning that the sun is the faster moving body. Roughly 3 to 4 months earlier, the sun was conjunct Jupiter.
Yeah, back in July.
Right. So the sun is moved out to this first quarter square, which is a crisis point or a point of decision. It says that what began at the beginning of the cycle, the sort of sun, Jupiter, new moon, as it were, in Cancer, whatever that feeling of connection, goodness, truth, family, belonging was about, that part of the challenge here is to integrate those feelings with opposing points of view. Libra. Libra is the other. And Libra is accommodating because it recognizes that we don't naturally agree. And so we've got to contract, we've got to negotiate. And so I think that part of this square, the negative side would be if there was no objectivity in your process. If whatever takes you away is purely Jupiter in Cancer, then it's like, just inflation. And yet, if it's inclusive, this is what I need, this is what I feel, this is what I believe, and, it's interesting what you have to say about it. Well, let me integrate some foreign concept or element, and if that can nourish the tree of my beliefs, then we're likely to have it last more than an hour or a day or two.
And if we do this well, we actually then can follow through with the work that needs to happen, because we have another sign change in the making as Mars moves from Leo into Virgo on
the 18th.
On the 15th. On the 15th.
October 15th.
On the 15th, Mars moves into Virgo. Now, Mars was, for the last month or so, was totally playful and doing things and making presentations and dramatic shows, kind of like this show down we have on the governmental level in Congress. This is Mars and Leo playing out like strutting stuff and saying my idea is great and this is the way it has to be, and everybody being so full of themselves. But when Mars moves into Virgo on the 15th, it's time to get down to work because Virgo is focused. Mars isn't thrilled. Mars is not thrilled about being in Virgo, but Mars buckles down and does what it needs to do.
Yeah, it's interesting with the debate about, healthcare or this whole governmental thing that we've got going on. Aren't there real numbers behind all of this? Is there not someplace? And I think there are even nonpartisan agencies which say, look, here are the costs, here are the benefits. We don't hear much discussion of that. It is very Mars and Leo polemic or performance. But here's the thing. Mars goes into Virgo on October 15th, and I agree with Rick, that gives us a greater capacity to sort of buckle down, deal with details, and deliver on the gaseous promises of Mars and Leo. But it's almost like you hired the world's greatest accountant who's going to fix your company on a Wednesday. On a Wednesday, and Friday you have the party. And this accountant's the biggest drunk you ever saw. And your confidence in that person is really shaken. And that's because competent Mars in Virgo is hitting the good stuff in an opposition to intoxicating Neptune, and that'll be on October 19th.
Right, and remember, we had Neptune cooking a little bit earlier this month when we were talking about Venus squaring Neptune. Now, as Mars opposes Neptune, it's the danger of Mars opposed Neptune. Oh, and I have this in my birth chart. I don't want to say what I was going to say.
All right, well, let me tell you.
The danger is that it's very easy to say, I am focused. It's the accountant who's drunk. It's the other person. Because when in oppositions, whenever you have two planets opposite each other, often what we do is we take the side we don't like and we project it onto reality or someone else. Mars in Virgo is the hard worker. Neptune in Pisces is the spaced out, dreamy. It certainly can be spiritual. It doesn't have to be negative. It could be very much imagination. But Mars opposing Neptune, the danger is to project the problem of lack of focus or lack of accomplishment or lack of follow-through onto the other person rather than understanding that you had something to do with setting this up.
Yeah, and I think another level of meaning is whatever system or technique that you're using, which is Mars in Virgo, has to soften up a little bit.
Right.
To deal with Neptune. It's like, these are our rules, and it's 5 o'clock, and at 4:59, at 5 the gates are closed. That's it. What do you mean? You're bleeding, you're dying. Compassion is part of Neptune. And what this suggests is that we may have to be a little bit flexible to show compassion or to deal with exceptions. The challenge is going too far with it. Then do we throw the gates open and leave them open forever? Now, speaking of opposition, if we can back it up, This is the day after the full moon. October 18th is the full moon, with the moon in Aries opposing the sun in Libra. And this is on one level, a relatively benign full moon. And when I say benign, what I mean is that the sun at about 25, 26 degrees of Libra opposing the moon at about 26 degrees of Aries, there's not hard aspects from other planets. That's what makes it more benign. There's nothing else planetary-wise kicking it around. However, this is also a lunar eclipse. I think it's a partial lunar eclipse. I haven't looked it up. But it is a full moon and a lunar eclipse. One of the ways you know, when at the time of a new or full moon, the moon is close to the nodes, either node within about 13 degrees and change, you have the potential of an eclipse, the likelihood of an eclipse.
And for the record, this chart is drawn for Redmond for here, and this is the horizon, No, actually, that's not true. I take
No.
that back.
Yeah.
Never mind.
No, to illustrate the planets in their signs, we use a fixed wheel with 0 Aries always rising. And the rising sign is quite pertinent when you have a single and specific location that you're referring to. But since this is being seen by people in many parts of the world, we're just using what's called a 0 Aries
Right,
rising.
and although the chart didn't support what I was going to say, what I was going to say is true anyhow, and that is this lunar eclipse is not visible because the moon it's at 4:30 in the afternoon, so the moon won't be above the horizon yet. The lunar eclipse lasts a couple of hours. It'll be over by about 5:30, and so we won't be able to see this eclipse here. That's what I was going to say, but the chart...
Right, and I actually have the chart here. It's quite different. It's the Bellevue chart. It's not the Redmond chart. It's virtually the same. But
That means Nordstrom's is in
right,
it.
right. But it means for non-locals, these are adjoining towns. But Pisces, about 9 degrees of Pisces is rising, so Neptune's there. No wonder we had no idea what the correct ascendant was. The point I wanted to make was this. Well, there are a couple of points. One, the full moon is always in opposition, and it always represents dealing with polarized points of view. The sun in Libra's conscious desire to accommodate, to meet halfway, and to relate is opposed by the independent solo flying moon in Aries. So it is about the core issue of the Aries full moon is always, as is the Libra full moon. Is it about me or is it about us? But because it's an eclipse of the moon means that something associated with the moon, which is the past, which is habitual, perhaps needs to go. The shadow of the earth passing over the moon could indicate, come live on the earth in the present instead of holding on to old emotional habits, in this case of independence, of separateness, or of isolation. I think, we're not all Aries, but almost everyone has moments of isolation.
We're not all Aries?
No. Well, we means
we are.
you and others. Yes.
That.
Rick, are all Aries. And there are other indicators of isolation in a chart. Uranus to the moon, planets in the 12th house, certain Neptunian things. But the eclipse of the moon, in this case, I think means look at those places where you have isolated yourself and made it difficult to compromise, to accommodate, or to have a healthy functioning relationship.
And I think the fact that this eclipse, as Jeff said, at least where we live, has Pisces rising, even though there are no aspects exactly to the moon during this eclipse, the fact is that we still have this Mars opposition to Neptune, and over the next few days, as the sun changes signs and moves into Scorpio, it will pick up on, and you can see there's already a blue line there, but that line will thicken up. So the whole dreams and the illusions and the Neptune thing, we're not done with it yet.
Yeah, and in fact, on the 21st, which is just 3 days after the eclipse, Mercury, the communication planet, stops and begins its thrice annual retrograde or backward cycle, which puts a little bit of wobble of Neptunian fuzziness in the realm of information flow and communication. And Rick, what I'm thinking is, we started with Uranus-Pluto and this sharp, powerful, intense contrast. But as we go along, we're seeing more and more sort of Neptunian nebulousness. Now, this may have to do with alcohol as a means of escaping the pressures of life. And apparently there's a good deal of that going on in Washington, D.C. at the moment. But it continues, I think, in Mercury retrograde in a subtle way, continues that theme of what do we do with the issues of our life? When do we escape them? Escape seems to be coming back just as we're going into the maw of Uranus square Pluto.
Well, and that's true because, as we said at the beginning, we started out the month, the question was, is the Uranus square Pluto most potent when the sun is in the picture rattling that whole scenario? Or as the month continues and these numbers get closer and closer until November 1st, when these planets are identically at the same degree, 90 degrees apart. But what's interesting, Jeff, is that I agree with you. From about the 15th on, or maybe the 10th on, we have this kind of expansive, spacey, hopeful, dreamy, illusory, evasive energy. It's hard to get our hands wrapped around it or our mind wrapped around it. And then the sun on the 25th, it trines Neptune. That's even more of that. But the month ends with that retrograde Mercury now backing into Saturn a second time on the 29th, and it ends also with Mars, actually Mars lined up with the moon, but Mars forming aspects to the Uranus-Pluto that are now 9 degrees 31 minutes, 9 degrees 23 minutes. They're less than they're about 1/6 of a degree from being exact. It's only 2 days away from them being exact. And we end with this kind of kick that brings the focus of that back so strong that we think, what the hell did we do this month? Where did we go? What did we walk into, like Disneyland for a couple of weeks and just get distracted? The same stuff is here again, but it's different.
Well, I think there is one factor that might pull some of these diverse pieces together, and that's the sun going into Scorpio on the 22nd of October. Now, we think of Scorpio as the deep, dark, intense, oversexed Charles Manson, kill them, screw them, whatever. Well, Scorpio is also a deeply feeling water sign that takes the Libra intellectualization of relationship and moves it to a deeper but more sensitive place in relationship. And I'll tell you, if you're going to meet a crisis, you want good Scorpio energy, because good Scorpio energy will attend to you and not ignore the crisis. I think that the sun's union, particularly on the 30th, with the moon's north node, a point of growth or integration, reiterates the nodal theme that lasts for 18 months while the north node is in Scorpio, that going deep and deeply feeling makes us more competent and does not necessarily distract us from the duties and the crises that we're facing. Because Scorpio isn't illusory like Neptune or Pisces, but it is watery and feeling. And yet it's watery and feeling in situations where we're under pressure. So our ability to handle pressure is really being tested, I think.
And in conclusion, or at least near conclusion, I've moved, since we won't be back here until the following Wednesday, November 1st is a Friday, we won't be here until the Wednesday following that. That on the 1st, we have Uranus and Pluto. Here it shows, this is late in the day, they're 2 minutes, which is 1/30th of a degree apart, and yet earlier in the day they are exact. What's significant is not only is Mars still in the picture, we talked about that a moment ago, but what Jeff just talked about the sun in Scorpio lined up with Mercury. Granted, now we've never done this before. This is next month, but it's the first of the month, and this is where we're heading. And that is that Mercury lined up with the sun are also in hum with this. So we have this complex pattern of these green lines of the irritation to Uranus, and yet Pluto, the deeper, more transformative point in this, is being supported by this deep communication. This is Mercury conjunct the sun in Scorpio, which is Pluto's sign, with Mars there. And I think we actually get the potential of having this be a very powerful transformation. Not that there isn't some noise around this date too.
Right, I think that's a good analysis. And this part is called a yod, or a finger of God, where two planets are sextile, harmonize with one another, and a third planet makes awkward quincunxes to both. Uranus in Aries would be the key point here, the pointer.
Called the apex.
The apex, thank you. And which I think reminds us something that's a belief of mine, whether it's true or not, I don't know, and that is that we have to invent something new for ourselves as individuals, for the U.S. as a nation, for humanity as a species. It'd be nice to do it with less pressure, but that's usually what brings about change.
Let's do it. What are we waiting for?
All right, so thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Soul Food.
Thank you, Julie. We'll take about a
Julie.
10, 15-minute break, and we'll be right back.